Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is appall, and this verb was suggested by the viewer Abdi. Abdi, thank you so much for this suggestion. Now let's take a moment and review some of the definitions or ways that we can use this verb. The first way you might encounter the verb appall being used can mean to fill with horror and amazement. Now, that might seem like two conflicting emotions, but really what this means is that someone is sort of so taken aback by how awful or terrible something is that it's causing that kind of amazement or shock. Second way to use this verb is to greatly dismay. What you'll notice about both of these definitions is that there are strong negative meanings to it, right? So if I just don't care for something, this isn't a verb that I'm going to use. But if I find someone's words, someone's actions just truly awful, so shockingly awful, this is the verb to use to describe that. For now, you should know that appall is a regular verb. If you want to make the progressive form of this verb, all you're going to do is add ing, and that forms appalling. The past tense and the participle form of this verb can be made by adding ed. Our base verb, appall, ends in a voiced L sound. This means the ed ending is just going to make a duh or a d sound. Okay? I'm not going to add an extra syllable when I pronounce the past tense or participle form. It should sound like this: appalled, appalled. Now, I don't have any phrasal verbs that we need to study, so we can move on and do a little verb tense practice. Today we'll review the simple past tense and the simple present. Let's use the simple past tense and talk about when to use it. So this verb tense exists to talk about completed actions that occurred at a known point in the past. Many times when people use the simple past tense, there will be a time signal. Could be a word like yesterday. Could be a specific date. It might be a phrase like 4 weeks ago. Okay? But not every sentence in the simple past tense will have those time signals. It can be implied as part of a longer conversation or a longer passage. So let's take a look now at making simple past tense sentences. In the affirmative, we're going to have the subject, okay, of the sentence. Then we're going to have that ed form of the verb. And this is true no matter what the subject is, so we're just going to follow that same pattern. You can see it in the example here. Their embrace of Nazi ideology appalled me. So the subject here might be a little complex to understand, but it's maybe describing a group of people who have kind of adopted, and maybe they're recycling, repeating views, ideas previously expressed by Nazis in Germany in the 1930s and 40s, right? I can't believe we still debate this as a world sometimes, but it definitely comes up here in the United States. I think Nazis are pretty awful individuals, and their actions, their beliefs are so shockingly bad. The horror of what they did, also shockingly awful. And anyone who tries to sort of justify that, like they weren't so bad, right? That appalls me, okay? So that's what that sentence is communicating there. Now let's talk about making a negative simple past tense sentence. To do this, again, we start with a subject. We'll use did, not, and then the base verb. So notice we're not going to use the ed form of the verb here. An example of this might be, the images didn't appall them too much. So here, maybe there was a thought that some photos or other things would cause, right, this sort of terrible dismay and horror, but for whatever reason, it did not create that kind of reaction. Finally, let's look at making a yes or no question in the simple past tense. To do this, we're going to start with did, then we'll have our subject, and then the base verb. Again, notice we're not using the ed form of the verb here. Here's another example. Did his speech appall you? So again, not just like I kind of dislike it, but it rises really to a just horrible, kind of awful level. Now let's talk about making some sentences in the simple present. We use this verb tense to talk about our habits and our routines. We also use it to discuss facts. And this is a verb tense where we need to pay attention to our subject. If our subject is I, you, we, or they, then we will just use the base verb. Okay, so no suffixes, no special endings. But if the subject is he, she, or it, then what we'll do is add an S to the end of the verb. Let's take a look at an example sentence. The country's pivot toward landmine use appalls a variety of experts. This sentence was used in a newspaper article in the last 6 months or so, discussing how I think it was 5 nations were ending their ban on landmines in conflicts. And again, this is something that many people found to be just horrific and awful because of the long-term damages and injuries that can be done, and how those risks exist for years and years and years. It's not just confined to the time of a conflict. Now let's move on and talk about making sentences in the negative. Again, in the simple present, we need to pay attention to our subject. If our subject is I, you, we, or they, we'll use do not and then the base verb, or don't and then the base verb. But if the subject is he, she, or it, we'll use does not and then the base verb, or doesn't and then the base verb. So here, I'm not adding an S to the end of the verb when I make negative sentences. Here's another example. It's only shocking when his behavior doesn't appall us. Okay, so here his behavior is our subject there of that piece. It's what's controlling. That's why it's singular. That's why you see does not here. And I would say this sentence might be inspired by a particular government official in the United States. Now, let's move on and make a yes or no question in the simple present. To do this, we'll start with do or does, then we'll have our subject, and then the base verb. Again, we are not going to add an S to the end of the verb when we make a yes or no question. Here's my last example. Do their policies appall you? I always try and bring real life examples, and as I looked for examples of appall, I would say that this word gets used a lot connected to people's words, their actions, and also various policies, be they within an organization or company or at a government level. There can be certain decisions that are made that people find really shockingly horrible or horrific. And so you might encounter this verb being used in that way. Now, let's spend a moment looking at some words that are related to our verb appall. And we're going to start today with a couple of adjectives. Now, I mentioned appalled could be the past tense form of our verb, but it can also be an adjective. When we use this word as an adjective, we're describing someone that is greatly dismayed or horrified. That ed ending with an adjective generally implies that someone has a particular feeling, and that's what we're describing, the person or thing that has the feeling. So an example of this might be, the crowd looked on, appalled by what they were witnessing. So here we're maybe describing a group of people. I know the sentence is not too specific. I didn't want to get too graphic in detail or mention specific incidents, but really just anytime something awful, horrible happens, we might see a description like this. So the people that witnessed something terrible in the situation, they had that feeling of possibly being horrified. Another adjective that's connected here is appalling. It's also our progressive form of the verb. When we use an ing ending on an adjective, though, usually what we're describing is the thing that causes that particular feeling. So here we might be describing something that causes that shock, horror, and or dismay, maybe some combination of those feelings. An example of this might be, several people suffered appalling injuries. So if you saw it, you might kind of think like, oh, I can't look at that. That's too horrible. It's too awful. One last word for us. It's the adverb appallingly. And remember that ly suffix is a good indication that we have an adverb. Not every word that ends with ly is an adverb in English, but the majority are. So when we use this word as an adverb, we're either describing a verb or another adjective, and we're describing it as being to a horrifying or shocking degree. You might also think to a horrifying level. An example of this might be, female startups are getting an appallingly low percentage of venture capital investments. So this is the idea of entrepreneurs receiving funds to kind of build their business or build their product, get it in front of more people. And this is something that's been true, I think, for a very long period of time. Certainly true in the United States, and I think it applies in many other countries as well. When you compare startups that are led by males versus females, the amount of financial support they get generally causes a lot of people to go, oh, how is that possible? Well, thank you so much to Abdi for suggesting today's verb. I thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a great day.